Your regime, your government, the American regime, they supported the Holocaust in Gaza, the ongoing Holocaust in Gaza. We stood against it.
Okay, the point I would make.
No matter how,
let me respond. Let me respond.
No matter how you try to frame it and pretend that we killed in Iran tens of thousands of people on the streets and all that fake media propaganda, the reality is the reason why Iran is hated is because we're against ethnic cleansing. We're against ethno-supremacism. And that is something that the Epstein class that rules over all of you cannot tolerate.
Piers Morgan is put under pressure by Professor Marandi on Piers Morgan Uncensored as the debate intensifies over the growing U.S.-Israel conflict with Iran, the reasons behind the strikes, and the expanding global reaction. While Piers Morgan leans on arguments about military strength and free speech, Professor Marandi pushes back by questioning Western viewpoints and pointing out the real impact of foreign involvement. As the discussion explores the risks of further escalation, looks back at lessons from past conflicts like Iraq, and considers the uncertainty of what may come next, also touching on international law, the impact on civilians, and the clear divide in opinions. So let's take a closer look and see how Professor Marandi challenges Piers Morgan on Piers Morgan Uncensored.
If it comes to a shooting match, as it currently is, how can Iran possibly expect to withstand the United States military before we involve the Israelis? So do you accept that militarily this can only end one way if Iran continues to react the way that it's done, particularly if, as it brings in all the other Gulf states and is attacking all its neighbors, as Iran has been doing, actually it's achieving the opposite of what it would have hoped to have done. It's rallying the Gulf states behind Israel and America.
Well, first of all, these Gulf Arab family dictatorships, they host U.S. bases, and those bases are being used against Iran. So they are complicit in the murder of Iranians. They can't have their cake and eat it too. They cannot be a part of aggression and say that we are neutral. With regards to the number 40 that you say, that is American propaganda. The White House is always saying all sorts of nonsense. Far less people were killed this time round than last time round. The leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, he was martyred because he stayed at home. And he said, I'm not leaving my office and my home because many Iranians have nowhere to go, and so I cannot leave. And he chose to stay, even though everyone knew that he would be a primary target. Unlike your leaders and the Epstein class in your country, which do all sorts of things to ordinary people, he stood with his people, and he stayed with his people. And that's why he's so popular. And unlike the propaganda that we see on your show all the time with these insane pundits who've never been to Iran, who know nothing about Iran, who just repeat these Epstein-class talking points. The Iranian people are steadfast and standing beside and behind the Islamic Republic. And as we speak, across Tehran, under missile fire, you see huge crowds of people in different parts of the city protesting against the United States and calling for the armed forces to resist. And might does not make right. As I learned from school, children know this. We are in the right. Your regime, your government, the American regime, they supported the Holocaust in Gaza, the ongoing Holocaust in Gaza. We stood against it.
Okay, the point I would make.
No matter how.
Let me respond. Let me respond.
No matter how you try to frame it and pretend that we killed in Iran tens of thousands of people on the streets and all that fake media propaganda, the reality is the reason why Iran is hated is because we're against ethnic cleansing. We're against ethno-supremacism. And that is something that the Epstein class that rules over all of you cannot tolerate.
Looking at this, what immediately becomes clear is that military strength on paper does not always reflect how conflicts actually play out. Because even though the United States holds major advantages in size and capability, History has repeatedly shown that irregular warfare can shift results in unexpected ways, as seen in Iraq and Afghanistan, where smaller groups using local knowledge and adaptive tactics were able to resist far stronger forces for years. And Iran also holds important geographic leverage, especially around the Strait of Hormuz, which plays a major role in global oil transport and gives it influence that cannot be measured by troop numbers alone. At the same time, there is a larger geopolitical reality that is often missed, since Iran is not isolated and maintains regional influence through networks and partnerships that make any direct conflict more complicated. While global powers such as China and Russia also have economic and strategic interests connected to Iran, adding more layers of tension and making the situation far more delicate than a simple confrontation. Because even limited escalation could disrupt energy supplies, increase oil prices, and trigger economic consequences worldwide. However, it is also necessary to stay balanced and avoid turning the issue into a one-sided narrative, since support for resistance does not mean every action or policy is justified, as Iran, like any government, still faces criticism over domestic policies and human rights concerns. But the key takeaway is that reducing this to a straightforward military outcome ignores the real complexity involved, because power is shaped not only by military size, but also by geography, alliances, economic resilience, long-term strategy, and public support.
Well, no Epstein-class rules over me, and the difference between me and you is I'm able to look at our leadership, from our Prime Minister to our former UK Ambassador to America to the former Prince Andrew, and I'm able to publicly criticise them and say I find all of them, frankly, pretty deplorable and shameful to their country in the way they conduct themselves. You would never say that about your Supreme Leader, because had you said that on the airways...
How do you know?
Well, hang on, because had you called your Supreme... Let me explain to you. Yeah, if you let me I'll let you speak. Let me speak. Had you criticised your Supreme Leader while he was alive publicly, had you done it publicly in the way that I can do about my Prime Minister or my royal family or my ruling political class, then you would have disappeared from the airwaves extremely quickly. You and I know that. And when it comes to the reaction of the people on the street in your country, you would like everyone to believe it's all one way. Everyone's on the side of the regime that you've propped up for years. But I would show you this scene. Look at this and tell me what we're looking at. It looks like people to me celebrating the toppling of a statue of your dead Supreme Leader.
Wow, look at those millions of people on the streets. Stunning. Why don't you show the crowds that are 100 times larger in small cities than these crowds? Because you cannot do that. Because in order to remain on air, you have to pursue certain narratives. But if you were at my university and you were in my classroom, you would see students with all sorts of views saying whatever they want. A student would say, Iran is worse than North Korea. And I would laugh at him and make fun of him in a friendly way till the end of the semester. But you have this alternative Iran somewhere in the universe in your mind. And based on that, all your assessments are made. You're
okay. Well, criticize your regime then. Okay, well, criticize your regime then. If you've got such freedom of speech, criticize your regime right now. Go on,
Piers.
You can't, can you?
Piers,
you're full of hot air. You remind me of Comical Ali in the Iraq War, who kept just talking complete nonsense about his ruling, his regime and ruler.
The problem is, I don't know how to deal with your... Be quiet for a second and let me respond.
What makes this discussion interesting is how quickly it becomes about narratives as much as facts, Because public understanding of countries like Iran is often shaped by years of media framing and long-standing geopolitical tension. And while independent reports suggest that opinions inside Iran are more diverse and complex than what is usually shown in outside commentary, that does not mean the situation is ideal. It just shows that the reality is not as simple as it is often made out to be in Western debates. The key point is learning to separate fair criticism from overly simplified storytelling, since it is valid to question Iran's leadership and policies, but it is also valid to question how those critiques are presented and used in political arguments. Because reducing an entire nation to a single image or storyline does not really help in understanding what is happening. And in truth, these issues are layered and complicated. So accepting that complexity leads to more balanced conversations, instead of just repeating fixed viewpoints. At the same time, comparisons about freedom of speech are not always clear-cut either, because even though Western countries may have stronger legal protections, they still face pressures like media influence, political interests, and public reaction that can affect what gets highlighted or ignored. While on the other side, countries like Iran also have internal discussions that are not always visible internationally, creating gaps in how people understand the situation. So deciding who has more freedom is rarely as simple as a yes or no answer.
Well, criticize your regime. Go on.
I know you're afraid. Be quiet. Let me respond.
I'm not afraid of anything.
Don't be so afraid. In Iran, we talk against the government, against policies day and night. You sit in a taxi. They're criticizing. You're on campus. They criticize.
I wanted you to criticize your regime right now.
No, I'm not going to. When you give me 5 minutes.
No, you're not going to, are you? Because you're a coward. And you're a paid up stooge of the regime. And you know if you do criticize them, they'll take you off the airwaves. Your job is to get on the airwaves and promote the regime. That's why you can't criticize them.
Yeah.
And if you could criticize them, you would.
Are you going to let me talk, or are you just too cowardly to let me talk? You're afraid of me.
I asked you a question. You wouldn't do it.
You're a coward.
You can't do it, can you?
You're a coward. I'm not going the coward. To criticize.
I can criticize my regime. I can tell you, I think Prime Minister Starmer has been a complete dud.
My country.
What are you going to say about your regime?
My country is under airstrikes from your criminal regime, your Epstein regime. My country, the people in my city are being slaughtered by your garbage regime, and you want me to sit
actually,
here?
The people in your country were slaughtered by your regime, weren't they? Only a few weeks ago, up to 30,000 of your people were slaughtered by your regime, weren't they?
Okay, Piers, forget it. If you don't want me to talk, I'll just sit down. You do the talking.
Well, I tell you what, we'll end it like this. I've had you on my show many, many times, right? When do I get invited on Iranian state television? Ah, you've gone.
I invited you to Iran, Piers. I invited you to Iran.
I'll do it like you do. I'll do it like you do. Down the barrel of a camera, you put me on Iranian state television and let me say what I think about Iranian state television in the way that I let you come on my show and criticize my country and the United States and the West. Fair's fair, right, Professor? Because you've got freedom of speech in Iran. There should be no problem in me, Piers Morgan, going on Iranian state television and hammering your regime. Only you won't let that happen, and the regime won't let it happen, because amongst the many things that you repress, the biggest thing you repress is freedom of speech. That's why you can't talk out against your regime, and that's why you wouldn't let me go on state TV in Iran and talk out against your regime. And that is the difference between us. So you can try and take the high moral ground, but the reality is that is the difference.
You are a genocide supporter. You supported it in Israel and Palestine, and you refused to come to Iran. And I invited you twice.
I literally did the opposite, actually. I literally did the opposite. And you should watch Uncensored more often.
On your regime TV, you don't even let me talk. You don't know anything about Iran, and you just talk and talk and talk, and you're afraid of me saying a single sentence.
The conversation moves away from pure facts and turns into a debate about credibility and who controls the story. Because no country is fully transparent, including Western democracies. And research from groups like Reporters Without Borders has shown that even highly ranked nations still face pressure from politics, business interests, and national security rules. So while places like the UK may offer wider freedom of expression, that does not mean the information space is completely free from influence or limits. At the same time, internal criticism inside countries like Iran does exist, but it is often not visible to global audiences. And sociological studies and on-the-ground reporting suggest that public discussion can still be active in private spaces, universities, and everyday life, which does not remove the fact that restrictions exist, but it does challenge the idea that people are completely silent or fully controlled. The reality is more complex, where people work within limits instead of having no voice at all. And this becomes even more complicated when both sides reduce the issue to extremes. Because it is fair to criticize Iran's leadership and human rights record, but it is also fair to question how outside narratives can sometimes simplify or use those criticisms in political ways. And at the same time, supporting a country should not mean ignoring its problems or avoiding accountability, since the truth usually lies somewhere in the middle, where both power systems and real public life are more layered than either side admits in a heated debate.